there, sinners. It's Adam Knox, and welcome to another episode of The Cult of You, and yet another interview with the devil. My devil today is Eileen Mckusick, author and creator of the Tuning the Human Biofield, and essentially the creator of this process of using tuning forks to map the human biofield. Now, my initial interest in this actually came from a very different angle. I mean, obviously I was interested, as many of us are, in the study of cymatics and the effect of sound upon the body and frequency as a whole in this frequency or vibrational based medicines. Now, what was interesting for me is as I was exploring the work of the Meru Institute, where they were mapping almost the Hebrew alphabet around this biofield around the body, this apple-looking structure that's become so popular in many representations of energy systems, it was interesting for me, but I felt like something was missing, something was incomplete. I understood the value of sound and the creation and ideas of geometry. In fact, listen to the interview with Carl Johann Kalemann, where he explores the subject of the Mayan calendar system and their idea of the waveform and its process of creation and how that produces a type of geometry of the mind by which we then interpret or experience reality. These were all very interesting subjects and ideas, but it was when I found Eileen's work where something became practical that I could taste and apply within my own practice, where I was working with my partners or working with clients in order to produce healing experiences. Mapping this wonderful landscape of the unconscious was a little bit of a trying process. Eileen offers a very wonderful rich. Now, this is her first book. A new one is already out, and you can definitely find links in the description if you're watching on YouTube to all of her work, to her store, where you can pick up a copy of really good, high-quality tuning forks, as well as little starter packs to get the book so you can see where the biofield is, what it looks like. And if you want a little bit more detail, make sure that you catch the book review that was released earlier this week. One of the things that you'll find in our discussion today is how she came intuitively to this understanding and then mapped and verified it repeatedly through the work with others. An interesting discovery of almost using tuning forks as if they are sonar response systems, allowing the feedback to help her to determine a complete language of this biofield, what I would refer to as this personal unconscious field surrounding the human body, and how to change and heal and bring about changes for that. So if you're a healer, you may find the subject interesting. If you're fascinated in the areas of sound as medicine, or frequency and vibrational healing, you'll find Eileen's approach very unique and perhaps a tool set that may expand your own practice. We also explore some ideas in quantum mechanics. We look at the ideas of remote work, why does that work, or what her experience was in Earth, and how she was actually quite a skeptic to this. And then we explore a very interesting subject in the idea of singing, and how singing can actually be utilized as a tool of the expression of emotion, and very interestingly, how some of our relationships with our own singing voice can oftentimes be a reflection of our own repression of some of our emotions. A very interesting idea. She shares her own story, struggling as someone who was declared tone deaf for 7 years until she found her own voice. I'm confident you're going to enjoy some of our interesting conversation with Eileen today. So sit back, relax, and remember to live deliciously. Aileen, welcome to the Cult of You.
Thanks, Adam. Great to be here.
I've enjoyed your reading, and I got to be honest. For the first time in my life, I'm ordering tuning fork. I was going to order tuning forks online on Amazon, and I realized I don't actually know enough. I need to kind of chat to you, because then I found your website and I saw the collection you had, and it kind of made me realize there's a lot more to learn, so much to learn and so much to discover. And I wanted to take the time and sit down with you. So firstly, thank you so much. I know you're very busy. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me today. I want to kind of get straight into something specifically. So the idea of sound and sound healing is something that I think it's gaining momentum, and it's gaining understanding and resonance. And my first kind of real exploration for myself in this area was the work of Dr. Miyamoto and the concept of the water molecules, and understanding the thoughts that were placed upon water and the impact on it. Can you kind of open up a little bit for the audience, just to understand what effect does sound really have on us? I mean, we just kind of live in a noise pollution society. Is it really just what we're hearing? How deep does it go, the effect on our bodies and ourselves?
Well, what comes to mind is that there's a Vedic saying, Nada Brahma, which translates into all is sound, or God is sound. So really, everything is vibration, whether we see it with our eyes, or we smell it with our nose, or we taste it with our tongue. All of our senses are receiving vibrational information. It's a little confusing because there's two definitions of sound. So one definition is what we hear with our human ears, which is around 20 hertz to around 20,000 hertz. And then there's another definition that all vibrations are sound. So when we're talking about sound, we need to clarify which definition we're using. And when we use everything is vibration, then we're absolutely impacted by the vibrational quality of our environment all the time, by everything, everything from the tone of our father's voice when we were an infant, to the fluorescent lights over our heads when we're kids in school. I have a son. I remember trying to take him into Walmart to buy underwear and socks before school when he was in maybe 3rd or 4th grade. And we had to leave because he said, I can't take the tone in here. So the combination of the lights, of the vibe, the whole tonal landscape for a sensitive being was more than he could handle.
Kind of reminds me of that kind of funny meme about how when we're trying to see something with greater clarity, we tend to turn down the music, we turn down the sound. We're trying to reduce the information that's being taken in. And that idea of sound is information, and information is essentially the building blocks of creation and of our mapping. And I mean, that obviously goes in very deep, because we can speak about that at a psychological level, at a biological level, at all these various stages. But one of the kind of ideas that I think translates, that we see in music and we also see in medicine, is this concept of coherence and incoherence. And I was very caught up by the studies of the Heart Math Institute, just talking about when we enter into heart coherence, and the heart kind of enters in coherence, how we almost have a larger field of effect on our environment and on our bodies. Is this a real thing? I mean, is this something that is what puts us out of tune with this, or how do we find this coherence in daily life, and how do we measure or understand it a bit better?
Well, it's funny. The word coherence has always had meaning to me, but it's frequently brought up that a lot of people don't necessarily know what we mean when we're talking about coherence. And I've been playing with the terms regulation and dysregulation lately, because I think we can all relate to when you're in a dysregulated state. when you've got that feeling inside, whatever it is, and you're not cool, you're not smooth, you're not patient, you're not groovy, you're dysregulated. And it's not a comfortable place to be. And when we are dysregulated, we often seek regulation in some way. And it's the same thing with coherence and incoherence. I mean, we're really kind of talking about the same thing. Coherence means everything's in phase. It's like if you have a symphony orchestra and everybody's playing with the conductor to the same sheet music in the same key, like that's coherence. That's a very regulated kind of experience. But
Yeah.
incoherence is different sheet music, different rhythms, different, everything's just kind of out of order. Whereas coherence, everything comes into order. And specifically with the Heart Math Institute, what they figured out is that when we are in coherent or regulated emotions like gratitude, like love, like appreciation, when we're in that really nice, pleasant place where most of us would prefer to reside all the time, then our heart is producing a coherent rhythm. And in that place, it's like everything in your body functions better. When you're dysregulated, then your systems are struggling to perform their jobs. It's like having a boss who's scary coming in and yelling at the workers, and then people aren't concentrating, they're not doing their jobs. So the same thing happens in our body, and we want to aim to find how to keep ourselves regulated and coherent so that we stay healthy and that we're pleasant to be around, right? Because it's very hard to be around people that are incoherent and dysregulated. They are throwing off all of these waves that are upsetting.
It's true. So, I mean, by that definition, it also recognizes anytime when we're experiencing almost pain signals or crossed mixed signals from people, there's just general dissonance inside of themselves. That kind of is also probably like why you're not really attracting the friends and the people and the situations in your life, because you're creating a sense of resistance because of that incoherent signal inside of you. And I mean, there's a lot of things that throw us off about that are quite commonly seen. I mean, a big stress, a big trauma, a breakup, a change or a move, or some kind of trauma that occurs. What are maybe some less obvious things in our environments that could be impacting or causing this that we're kind of taking for granted, we're not really paying attention to?
Well, I think a good generalized term for it is pressure. I think that when we're under any kind of pressure, that's where we blow out stress gaskets, where those old wounds and old triggers just come up and we can't even stop them. We don't have time to check ourselves. We don't have the bandwidth or the power to not have that kind of response, to not have that wound come bubbling to the surface. So generally, if people are well fed and well rested and they have money in their bank account and people around them aren't being jerks, most people will stay in a relatively regulated state. But when you get around difficult characters, when you get under financial pressure, when you get under time pressure, really even just right now, the culture, there's just this whole sort of like ambient cultural pressure, and it's that pressure that makes us come out sideways on ourselves.
Yes. Okay. So I always say that there's almost like a benefit to some of the stress, because some stress creates, like say, some pressure creates diamonds, in the sense of if we are aware enough and we're willing to dive into the stress or dive into the pain or the story, we kind of enter into the unconscious components of ourselves, and we might find that psychological reflection or that memory that makes it more of an effect on us than it may be on certain other people. And this is something that's always made me very curious about the unconscious and its effect, how simply having these unconscious patterns, or these patterns that we're simply not aware of anymore within ourselves, that are causing these dissonances, these dysregulations inside of our lives, how that affects our relationships and the people and things around us. I want to walk through a little bit of journey before I kind of get into the real meat of that and why the human biofield was such a brilliant revelation in the way it's put together. But as you yourself went onto that journey, because you originally started exploring body healing modalities and then started exploring the ideas of sound, at which point was it that you were able, because you mentioned that you were tone deaf slightly when you started in this journey and you had to go through a whole adventure to learn to sing and learn to understand tones. How does a tone deaf lady learn to pick up through vibrational tone instruments, these tuning forks, this entire hidden secret language, essentially of the unconscious field that we all possess?
Every time we feel an emotion, we slap a word on it. But what it really is it's a particular tone, it's a particular feeling, it's a particular waveform that we're generating. So when we're sad, we generate a particular waveform. There's many iterations of sadness. There's melancholy and loneliness and abandonment and keening and wailing. There's all these different ways that we can feel sad and all these different subtle differences in the waveforms that are being produced. When we're angry, we give off particular waveforms. I remember saying to my husband once, "Stop being a jerk." And he said, "I'm not saying anything." And I said, "You're giving off jerky vibes." So there's this language of vibration that we all know. In fact, certainly we know that our animals know it. If you've had pets, they know they know exactly how you're feeling because they resonate, because they vibrate in the same language. And we've even found that plants vibrate in the same language. So all of nature, all of creation has this common language of vibration. And music seeks to approximate it. For example, when you're scared, you produce a waveform like this, and we can hear that in the tuning fork. If I hold a tuning fork over you and you're scared, or in a place where you had a scary memory, we can hear the pulsing of that waveform that actually animates you to shake when you're scared, right? That's the waveform is this. So, and that's like the soundtrack to Jaws, kind of gets that going. And so just like when you and I listen to music, we feel that emotion. It becomes evoked in us. It resonates in us. That's what I found when I listened very deeply to a tuning fork. I'd bounce the sound off somebody and listen to the emanations that their body was making, because those frequencies that we're giving off are very high frequency and they're very low amplitude. Now we can sense them. Even like lug nut people can usually sense vibes coming on. We all have that ability to sense because those vibes are emanating. Or when you get like an EEG and they put all those electrodes on your head, like those are brainwaves that made it through your skull. Like they don't stop at your scalp. They come off. And we very often have the experience when we're with loved ones and our trains of thought go together. We'll be in a conversation and I'll think of something and then you'll think of it too. You know what I mean? Because we are tuning into that vibration. So the tuning forks became kind of like an invisible ink decoder where I'd create this wall of sound and I'd be able to pick out these patterns of vibrational information and expression. And it took years. I mean, it really took years for me to learn the language. It wasn't something I figured out right away. It was a kind of like teaching myself the sonic braille. And it was a lot of fumbling in the dark with these moments of illumination where I'd suddenly see patterns. I'd understand how things fit together. I'd grasp that a particular tone was a particular thing. And one of the last ones that I actually came to recognize, even though it's one of the most obvious ones, was fear. And when I finally heard fear and understood what it was, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I've never, like it was going on in people, but I had shut down my own experience of fear. I'm the youngest of 6, and I grew up in a pack, and in a pack, if you display fear, you get attacked. And so I had to learn how to suppress fear like mightily. You know, I started traveling around the world by myself when I was 16. Like I'm not afraid of anything, right? Because I had numbed out my own experience of what fear feels like in the body. It took me a long time to recognize the tone of it, which is kind of strange. But now 26 years in, you know, not only can I understand all of the emotional vibration, but also pathologies. Because every single pathology, it's kind of like when something goes wrong in your car starts making a funny noise. And a good mechanic can tell just by the noise what that is. So it's the same way. Like if I hold a tuning fork over any of your organs and they sound wonky. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I can tell you, I can see and hear. My brain becomes kind of like an ultrasound screen. And I can see. The sound lets me see and hear and understand what's going on. So any healthy organ, any healthy system doesn't make noise. It just makes beautiful music.
Okay.
But when things get twisted and bent and go south and start not functioning right, they start making noise. So, we're designed to be in harmony mentally, physically, emotionally, but our culture really takes it out of us.
You touched on so many like very interesting kind of key points there, and I want to unpack that a little bit. And one of the first things that I think is the biggest gemstone that was shared there is you spoke about actually being numb to fear and not being able to pick that up because of your own numbing of fear, not being able to experience that, and how we judge these components of ourselves as that's almost my weakness, that's my shame, and I disassociate from it. Because I think that in and of itself almost explains so many bad relationship choices and business choices, because we're unwilling to own our own darkness and our own projections, and then we become blind to it in others. Because I was thinking, even if we look at the development of what clairvoyants would speak of and mediums would speak of across very different, completely different, more esoteric kind of domains, it's the same philosophy that when a spiritual visionary first begins to read another person, the first messages are really about themselves until they kind of learn to perceive past this and do that therapy and do that inner healing. And that's how you become clairvoyant or clear seeing or clear hearing, which kind of leads me to, I want to emphasize that idea, but like it leads me to want to unpack a little bit more of your process, if I can, in that sense. Especially because language can be so elusive as a tool set. When you say sense or hear the sound, especially stepping out of the point where it's just an audible kind of sound in certain cases, and we're looking at the entire spectrum of vibration, is it a case of the tone is vibrationally, it's kinesthetically felt through your body? Is it emotionally felt? Is it audibly picked up in your ear? What is that kind of process for you personally? And maybe how did it start and how has it evolved?
Well, I think it's really all of those things. Certainly it is the tone. But this is what I discovered from teaching, was that most people are actually more kinesthetic than they are auditory. And so even though I had been practicing, by the time I started teaching, I'd been practicing for 14 years. And for me,
Oh, wow.
I was very tonally oriented. But what I found is that many of my early students couldn't discern the changes in tone, but they could feel the vibration change in their fingertips. So,
Okay.
if it sounds differently, it's vibrating differently. It's going to feel different as well.
Oh.
And so this whole idea is based on the notion that our minds are toroidal electromagnetic bubbles that our body basically resides in. So the biofield, as I see it, extends about 6 feet out in every direction, about 2 feet on the top and bottom, and is our mind, our conscious mind, is our subconscious mind, but it's where our memories are stored. And my research was combing through this field with a vibrating tuning fork very slowly, listening to and kind of exploring. Like I explored the biofield and over the course of a number of years observed this pattern. And I was like, wow, there's a whole anatomy and physiology to this magnetic bubble that surrounds us, and actually mapped it in the biofield anatomy map and discovered that it's where our memories are stored, and that traumatic experiences create chaotic waveforms in the field that you can find with a vibrating tuning fork going slowly. So what I get most people to do is to just tune into your fingertips, because you can feel when you hit resistance. I mean, it's so strange, right? You're just combing a tuning fork through the air and all of a sudden you're stuck. And you're like, whoa, it won't go any further. And it just seems to me that there's charge there. And we talk about memories that we still have charge around. We literally do have charge around them, and we can find that very specific memory, and we can find that charge. Just to give you an example, I was working with somebody a few months ago, and I was combing through his field. And so the outer boundary of the field is gestation and birth. It's kind of like dropping a needle on an album and like reading the vibrational record of somebody's life. And so I'm going along in him, and all of a sudden I hit against something in the field that's so stuck, and the fork goes so dissonant, so wildly dissonant, that he's like, wow, what is that? And so I looked at the timeline, know how old he is, know how big the field is. I'm like, okay, this has happened around when you were 18. And he said, that's when I went through the windshield of a car. Now
Oh,
think
wow.
about what kind of vibrations the body is producing as it's going through the windshield of a car in the aftermath of something like that. Like that is
Yeah.
in your memory banks. It is not just stored in the brain. It's stored in your
Hmm.
electrical system, right? Because everything we see
Yeah.
and smell and touch and taste and feel and experience is all an electrical impulse. So it would make
Hmm.
sense that our memories are in our electrical system. And I see them as stored in these standing waves, kind of electromagnetically encoded. So when I encounter a traumatic memory, I both feel it in my fingers, I hear it in the complexity and the changing tone that's expressing what the vibes were in that moment. Sometimes I will get
Hmm.
visual images or metaphors, sort of like in the screen of my
Okay.
mind. Sometimes when I'm
Yeah.
working, I'll get aches or pains or discomfort in very specific areas in my body. Like if I'm working with
Hmm.
something and it's related to an old injury in a particular part of the body, I'll feel that in my body. I'm very much an empath, and always have been.
Hmm.
But now I understand, the feeling other people's feeling. I was just saying this morning that empaths tend to feel responsible for the well-being of people around them because they can feel what other people feel. And with
Hmm.
tuning, I have this wonderful ability, like whenever I go stay at a friend's house, this couple or whatever, and they're sniping, I can sit them down and I can bring them into order and coherence so that we can then enjoy ourselves. And I don't have to be sitting there feeling all of the discomfort. So it's a great
That's brilliant.
tool for empaths to sort
Hmm.
out other people's
Hmm.
noise so that then you can like hang out and not be disturbed by their dysregulation.
I love that because it's very, very practical. And I mean, like, again, I just want to kind of emphasize for a lot of people listening, because it's very easy to kind of chop off things like empath and psychic to pseudoscience and things like that. But we know now that the cerebellum calculates 400 billion bits of information, even though we're only consciously processing like 2,000 bits of information. So we don't have the cognitive conscious abilities to process all the actual data that's being received. And somebody that is quote unquote an empath is just somebody that's able to more identify or associate to these inner subtle information processes and really give voice to them and express them. And I think that's also why so many systems exist, like shamanism and other forms of spirituality and new tantra and even neurolinguistics and everything that start to help us give language and forms. And, fortunately, we have quantum mechanics and other sciences that are starting to explore these ideas. But for many that are kind of in that safe kind of modality, it's a little bit difficult because I think the arena of the mind that starts to open up in the inner life of individuals can become a frightening subject, especially when our own is very much dysregulated or disconnected in certain things like that. So one of the things I think is one of those common kind of questions that kind of explores for somebody when they're stepping into these kinds of things. How far is it a hypnosis and projection? And when does it get into the physical kind of component? And what does my self effect on that idea do? What's the role of the mind? And that kind of steps into the classic mysticism idea, right? The mind precedes all things anyway. So, the answer and the question is very deeply tied in. And you share a story in this earlier book of yours where you were talking about, I forget the full details, but it was a friend that was teaching dowsing to a group of people, and he mentally constructed this space in his yard. And when everyone went out and they were practicing physical dowsing and they were picking up vibrations, there was a wave. There was a field there that he could almost collapse again when it was done, but it was self-constructed. So it kind of makes a very interesting, compelling argument for this idea of the role the mind has on frequency and on reality. And obviously that rabbit hole can go quite deep. But what has been your experience of that, and how's your understanding of that kind of evolved through this process?
Well, you mentioned quantumness. That was my early explorations into trying to understand life, universe, and everything brought me to this, what the real exploration, as I understand it, and I might be wrong here, of the quantum theorists of the early 1900s. And what they basically realized is the observer affects the observed. that we are consciously co-creating life with our expectations, with the waves that we're giving off. That just simply by observing life, we are changing the way that it appears and that the way that it plays out based on our own expectations, our own stories, whatever energy we're bringing into the mix. So I think that one of the biggest things I learned, and I really came to see this very clearly when I started training a couple of apprentices, was just how powerful our intention is and how we have been kind of taught that it's not. And yet every single thought we think, every single vibration that we put out is creating our lives.
Yes.
You know, life happens in the space between us. You bring out things in me that other people might not, or I bring out things in people that other people might not. When I speak in front of different groups, depending on who they are, how warm they are, how much they already know of the information I'm sharing, I may be really brilliant, or I may really struggle and stumble if I've got a group of people that aren't buying what I'm selling, right? So there's far more creation of our lives going on all the time with our thoughts, with our words, with our emanations, with our subconscious stuff. Because so much of what is creating our reality, like you mentioned earlier, are these subconscious patterns that might be cultural, they might be inherited, they might be trauma that's passed on down the line. And very often people act out these garbage in, garbage out kind of equations, and they're not even connected to their behavior. When you try to reflect it back to them, they don't see it, they can't connect to it. It's what I call blind. And it's just their DNA. It's just their DNA acting out. If a lot of you is not conscious and not integrated, you're going to feel like you don't necessarily have control over your life. You might be in a very reactive state a lot. But the more coherent and regulated you become, the more powerful your word and intention becomes, because it's coming from a place that's whole, that's clear, that's present. And then you become a much better manifester. I mean, I have an astonishing ability to kind of create and manifest now because of my high degree of coherence and deep understanding of the power of sound and deep responsibility with my own thoughts and words about what I'm creating. And it's taken a long time and a lot of self-awareness and a lot of healing, honestly, to get to that point.
Yeah. It's powerful and something that you kind of just mentioned there. And it's something that I also talk about a lot because I think it's such an important idea. Even when we're studying hypnosis or influence language in the very first place, the general tonality of an individual speaks to their vibration, speaks to their coherence, and that has a measurable impact on how deep their own words actually go into the listener's mind and their range of influence really connecting. And it's not something that can really be faked. I mean, somebody can try and read the scripts and they can say the statements like they've learned it from a professional salesperson or something like that. But until they've actually done that inner work within themselves, that incoherence is still going to be picked up by the other individual's unconscious mind. And I love what you kind of mentioned because it reminded me a lot of the old, I think it was Jung that said, unless we go to the unconscious will come to us in the form of neuroses and illness and problems and things like that. And it's almost like you've got a little, I can't say it's a shortcut because it took you quite a bunch of years to map and understand that system, but that's now kind of like easy to get for anybody else that's kind of starting on that process and has a powerful map that's immediately practical for themselves and for others. And sorry, there's one more other thing, and I sound like I'm going on a tangent, but there was just another idea while I was researching your work and I was researching the way you represented the biofield. And it's either the Moore Institute or Moore Institute. Essentially, they worked on the structure of the Hebrew letters around the same structure of the torus. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with them and their work, but essentially their speculations was that the entire Hebrew alphabet was, as it was used in the old Kabbalistic philosophies, actually matches different perspectives inside of that same design that you reference for the human biofield. And it was almost like catching little glimpses of these things, which was a very interesting idea, because it's something that's mapped in different cultures as well, how the old Scandinavians mapped the runes to the space cube and all these things. Very interesting concepts. But what I want to kind of like explore with this idea of mind and these kind of ancient cultural references of possibilities and this almost quantum field that opens up in our discussion is you were talking about how at first you weren't a believer at all in this idea of remote healing, so to speak, that you could do this work with somebody that wasn't physically present in that. I remember in the book when you talked about that first experiment, you know, how you were almost kind of accurately mapping these things. Can you kind of explore that a little bit? And I'm very interested from where it started in that very first kind of session to how it evolved to like where you're seeing it now. And also a little bit, again, if you can take us into your mind and how do you actually perform that? Is it a physical hallucination that I'm doing? Am I projecting in front of me or inside of me when I'm doing the experience? Do you physically go through the tunings? Do you feel? Can you kind of like unpack that a little bit for the healers out there?
People used to ask me if I could do biofield tuning at a distance. And I would always say no, because it's physics, it's sound waves on the body. Like how would I do it at a distance? Like it didn't fit in my cosmological story. It seemed impossible, improbable, and even ridiculous. In fact, I was quite sarcastic and scornful and arrogant about it. As people tend to be towards me and the fact that I use tuning forks. It's an easy thing to be snarky about because it seems really silly and woo-woo. And so that was my attitude. It's like me, dismissal. But I have a friend, the gentleman who wrote the introduction to Tuning the Human Biofield, a fellow by the name of Dr. Carl Merritt, who's very learned about the biofield, about subtle energy. Just a brilliant fellow. And he asked me to try a distance session on him. He was in California and I was in Vermont. And, even though I was very skeptical, I'm also, one of my favorite things to say is, let's try this and see what happens. I love to experiment, that's just a scientist by nature. So I was game. And what we did was he lay down in his office in California and I pretended that he was on my table in Vermont. And we had no open line of communication, no phone, no nothing. And I didn't really know anything about him or his history or, I knew his age. And so I did what I learned to do up to this point, which was go through the field and read the field and take notes. And so I'm able to discern, particular ages where there was a lot of stress. I could tell what parts of his body were not quite right, where he had inflammation. He had a particular organ that was very off rhythm. I was able to describe the personality of his mother, the personality of his father, basically all the things that I do when we're in person. I read the record of your life and I reflect it all back to you. And so when I was done, we got on the phone and I went through my notes and he said, Eileen, all of that is exactly correct. And I felt you working on me. I felt a state change. Like I feel lighter now. I feel different. And I was astonished. Like I had to really eat crow because I've been so arrogant about how it was so impossible. And then I just did it. And I did it even as a skeptic. Do you know what I mean? Like I was like more attached to my skepticism than I was like, oh, maybe this could work. So
no belief required.
Yeah. And so then what happened was I started doing distance sessions with people and I did it with no open line of communication. And so what it did was it forced me to listen even deeper. When I would hear something and I'd be like, okay, that actually sounds like a breakup. That sounds like a move. That sounds like a car accident. That sounds like dad has this personality and you're on eggshells around him. Because I didn't have the person on the table to be like, okay, what happened when you were 14 related to your mom? because they couldn't answer me. So,
Oh
so
yeah.
yeah, so through that process of doing these distance sessions with nobody there, I actually went even deeper into my understanding of this language of vibration. And I'd get on the
I
phone with people and
see.
they'd just be astonished. They'd be like, how can you be so accurate with this? Like, are you psychic? And I was like, no, I'm not psychic. This is actually a very specific language and a very specific map. And this is all pattern recognition.
That's amazing. So, I mean, you physically see the person in front of you, and you physically walk through those spaces. It's not a mental thing. You physically go
No.
through it, and you pick up the resonance.
I walk around the
But the
table like
instinct.
I just am like, you're on the table. I just pretend you're on the table, and that's as far as I
Okay.
go. Like I don't need hair or a photograph. I don't need anything. I just like it because this is how intention works. The more you come to understand it, we can command subtle energy. So if I say your field is on this table and I'm going to read it, that's what happens. I do. And so,
But
and I get all of that information, and you can feel it. I mean, I do distance sessions regularly and have, and people are like, I feel tingling, I feel lighter, I feel this going on, I feel more energy. I mean, people feel it. So how does that work, right? Like, what's the
Yeah.
cosmology? What's the scientific explanation for how that's even possible? Well, as you noticed in the book, Tuning the Human Biofield, I actually have to introduce an entirely new cosmological story in order for biofield tuning to make sense. And I go to great lengths, spending chapters and chapters on kind of fleshing out what this different cosmological story looks like. And essentially, it's a cosmology of light and connection, as opposed to the dark and disconnected cosmology that we've all been educated into. And it has 2 additional states of matter and 2 additional forces of nature that we don't learn about in school. So the 2 states of matter are plasma, which is basically electricity, and ether. And ether is something that was absolutely been taken out of our cosmological understanding. It was taken away and replaced with the vacuum, the nothing. It used to be seen as an ocean of clear light. It's basically the very fabric or the essence, the clear light that through torsion spins itself into plasma, gases, liquids, solids. But essentially, it's all light, and it's all one. We could also call it the Akasha or the Akashic record, the idea that everything that ever is, was, or will ever be, the information of it is contained within this fundamental fabric of life itself. And so just like I can all of a sudden, realize that I'm thinking of my husband, I'm feeling this little thing, and I'm like, I'm feeling my husband, I better go look at my phone. And sure enough, he just texted me. What is that? That's resonance in the ether. That's us as antennas. I mean, what are we? We're antennas. Our bones are piezoelectric. We're water. We're transmitting and receiving information all the time, both locally and non-locally, because we're connected through the ether, through the water, right? It's all one water. It's all one light. It's all one thing. It's all one fabric. Just like I know that my foot itches, I can feel it in my brain that my foot itches. It's all connected. It's all connected. It's all one. And it resonates. And that's just the way nature works. In fact, I recently read that Tesla, and I don't know if this is true, Tesla got inspired towards this idea of wireless communication based on human resonance, of that feeling of like thinking about somebody and they're thinking about you. Or even, some of us have friends that we can feel them. We can have little internal conversations with them, even if we're not together. And that's how I do distance work, with that exact same principle.
It's very interesting. I mean, like I refer to that in my lectures as psychic rapport. With a rapport that we establish at an unconscious level, and obviously the more in vibratory harmony or resonance we are with the other, or the deeper that rapport, the stronger the communication. And especially, I think the more we are in touch with it within ourselves, we, through that quantum self, that transcendent self, almost become more in touch with the supposed other inside of everyone, which in many ways has been the kind of gemstone or essence of spiritual initiation throughout history, the deeper we unfold our own mystery, the deeper we connect to the mystery in all life and in all people. And that's, something that I love when you were talking about how you'd had to suddenly now open up to these other more subtle levels of that vibration to feel deeper into this field, to actually determine, okay, that's not just a memory. What is the memory? Is it a breakup? Is it a conflict? And really kind of differentiate and learn to speak this almost secret vibratory language of the universe, which we're capable of doing, but we're so left brain all the time that we're disconnecting, because we need sometimes the very tools that we use. Science is very great in many of its tools to kind of expand our thinking and really give us practical tools. But sometimes we can kind of lock ourselves. We can do the same thing with religion as well, and kind of trap ourselves in these little process boxes that prevents our growth. So, I can go on about this subject for days, because it's just such an interesting piece. It's just so much juicier. But we're kind of we're moving in on the hour, and there's still a couple of questions I need to kind of get asked or kind of discussed before I lose you for the segment. But the idea, you've got this really wonderful concept, singing the body electric. And I kind of love the idea, and also because there's a lot around that. And it sounds simple, but even when I read your story about singing, and they're not fully interested, but there's so many components of this idea and the power of the voice and this idea of vibration and uncovering these components of ourselves. How do we sing the body electric? For anyone kind of listening and discovering, explore that, unpack that just a tiny bit if you may.
Well, my second book is called Electric Body, Electric Health. And it's what I really came to see with the tuning forks and the way that the sound was interacting with the body. And I discovered that we have an electrical system that nobody teaches us about. We have an electrical system in its entirety. We run on electricity. When you're alive, your light is on. When you're dead, your light goes out. What's missing? Your electrical system. Your light went out. And I will also see the biofield and electrical system not only as mind, but also as what we would call soul as well. Sing the Body Electric is actually, it's a collaboration. Like what I do, we have a program called Sing the Body Electric that I do with these Australian brothers, Isaac and Torald Corin. And the work came from our collaboration. Back when I was 20, and this is in the book, I received very clear inner guidance that I needed to learn how to sing. And I was incredibly non-musical. I came from a non-musical family. I was the opposite of musically gifted. And so when this guidance came, I was very dismissive of it. But it wouldn't stop. It became kind of like the letters coming into Harry Potter's house, like coming in every direction. Like it was relentless, and it would not leave me alone. I was kind of bullied by my inner guidance into singing. And when I went to my first voice lesson when I was 20 years old, the teacher was trying to get me to just sing middle C. And as soon as I was put in that position of having to express myself musically and having to be vulnerable, right? What is music but really about expressing emotion? And what do most of us get growing up from our parents is an abstinence-only approach to emotion. I often ask in my classes, whose parents modeled effective emotional management? And nobody raises their hands. Nobody has ever raised their hands. And my parents managed their emotions really effectively and taught me really well how to do that. Like, no, we don't learn, right? And so what is singing but this vulnerable expression of emotion? And when we're so programmed to not be emotional, and certainly in my family with 6 kids, there was no room, there was like, stop your nonsense. Like any expression of emotion was just, right? And then there was other stuff probably too in the mix. So that when I went to try to just sing that first note, I felt like I had hands around my throat, my palms were sweating, my knees were knocking. It took me like 15 minutes to finally croak out a sound, and then I burst into tears. And my poor teacher was like not equipped to handle that. But I left being like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Like, where did my voice go? Why is this so hard? And I think so many people out there, so many of your listeners would agree. Like, do you feel comfortable standing up and singing in front of people? how many people do that? Practically none. I can stand up and talk in front of thousands of people. I don't have a problem with that. No fear. All that fear that I buried, it all went into like expressing emotion, which is kind of weird that I ended up in this process that's really all about finding and facilitating emotion. So anyway,
Yes.
I'm persistent and stubborn. And from that moment, over the course of 7 years, I went on to have 7 voice teachers. And the first 5 told me that I was tone deaf. They're like, you don't hear and you can't replicate sound properly, and you are never going to be able to sing. You're basically a hopeless case. But what I discovered with my 6th teacher was when I first picked up the tuning forks, I started getting body work and I started doing yoga. And what I discovered was that I was so tense. I was totally locked up. That life and the stresses of life and the trauma of growing up had turned me into a tight little ball that was terrified of emoting. And yeah. And so as I started to relax and come into my body and I started to work with the tuning forks, the way that I taught myself, the way that I got out of being tone deaf was my set of tuning forks was C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And so I would strike the tuning fork and I'd put the handle against the flap of my ear. And I would vibrate my head and I would match the vibration to the note. And so that's how I learned to recognize the notes, was through feeling them and matching the vibration of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
There's also quite an exciting insight. Please continue.
Yeah. So anyway, I did learn to not be tone deaf, but still struggling very much around just this whole idea of singing in front of people. And then I ended up meeting the Brothers Korn, because what happened was, over the years of working with the tuning forks and really coming to understand intention, right? Understanding resonance and entrainment, understanding the biofield anatomy, understanding just how we can use our minds to direct sound very specifically. I was like, I want to take everything that I've learned and I want to package it in like a pop song. Because how many people want to hang out and listen to tuning fork sessions or even attracted to something like this? But we all listen to music, whether it's in your car or at home or in the bank, wherever, there's always music. And so I paired up with these guys in order to do that, because they facilitate people coming into their voices and they co-write songs of them. They just kind of midwife that whole process through that scary, it's scary. But in the process of us working together to try to do that, we ended up coming up with this whole body of work that we didn't even set out to find. What we discovered was that there are very specific tones that resonate in very specific areas of the body. And that when you tone through all of these places, it gets your voice into your body, into your own human you were instruments, your human instrument. Yeah. And instead of trying to sing from up here and be really nervous, you get to make sounds like all the way down in your tailbone and out your butt, like out your belly button. Yeah. And once you go through this whole experience, this program that we do in Sing the Body Electric, what it brings you to is a place of enjoyment of your own voice and of your own instrument. So what we do in the beginning, we have everybody sing happy birthday to themselves, and then we go through all these exercises, get you to sound all of these notes, get you in touch with your electric body. I give you a tune-up, we breathe, we get you all charged up and learning how to play your instrument, and then we have you sing happy birthday at the end. And that second happy birthday is fun. It's fun, right? So why do we want to be healthy? Why do we want to be whole? Why do we want to have money? Why do we want to have our problem solved? This is something that always gets overlooked, because with the world being in the crisis that it is, it's almost bad taste to say the reason why we do all of this is because we want to have more fun. We want to enjoy ourselves and our experience of ourselves more. And to have a human body, have an instrument that can make all of these fun sounds and hate your voice is a tragedy. It's a tragedy. Like watching everybody sing that second happy birthday and how they play with themselves and they play with their voice and they express themselves. that's bringing themselves into a place of greater health, of easier manifestation, of easier relationships. All the things that we want are riding on our voice and our breath. Right? And so with tuning, what I'm doing is I'm using sound from the outside to bring you into order and to get you embodied. But in Sing the Body Electric, we're using our voice from the inside to do the same. We can heal ourselves with our breath and our own voices. Like everything that we need to be whole, we have. I mean, we already have to learn how to use it properly. But it's not as hard as we're told that it is to get healthy and strong and clear and embodied and empowered.
It's such a liberating, powerful, healing perspective as well, to look at something that's very near and dear, I think, to many people, is that ability to sing and to connect with your own voice, because there's so many layers of metaphor that's in there, right? Discovering your own voice, unlocking your story through that process, learning to express yourself emotionally and find those narratives that are in there, and then exploring those kind of stages. I even remembered as early as starting, I think it was by the Monroe Project, and it was the Gateway Experience meditations. And it was kind of like my first young exposure to binaural sounds and the exploration of it. And what they did in that practice was, it wasn't a case where you had to listen passively only to the things, you had to intone it as well. And those practices are in many of the old magical traditions, from the Western Hermetic traditions to the shamanic to across the world. And to have that, I was like listening to that and I'm like, I need to sign up for that workshop. When's the next one? You know, have that experience, because there's so much there. We're kind of coming to the end of our time. And I think I always have another question, because the more you open up and share, the more there is to unpack and the more there is to discover. But I'm going to let people kind of read about that in this book and read about it in your new book. And I believe, there's your YouTube channel and your website. I believe you also sell the tuning forks and everything on the website. We can get them all there.
Well, the tuning forks really work with the principles of resonance and entrainment. So we have two types.
Okay.
We have unweighted ones, and those are the kinds you think of if you're going to tune an instrument or tune a piano, if a doctor is going to listen, check your hearing. And then we have weighted ones that have barrels on the end, and that's if your doctor is going to check to see if you have neuropathy. So these are tools that doctors have and use diagnostically. We use them diagnostically as well, because a weighted fork, when placed on the body, especially we make these amplifier boots called circuit boots, becomes like a stethoscope. And I can put a fork on your chest, and I can listen to the rhythms of your heart. I can tell if you've got anxiety. I can feel how energy is moving through different hemispheres, or more in your head and less in your feet. So there's a lot of feedback that comes through those. So initially, whether in the field or on the body, the tuning forks will initially resonate with whatever information or rhythm is present. But then, because they're producing a strong, coherent rhythm, they will entrain the body into a more coherent expression. So a strong, coherent rhythm will overtake and entrain a weak, incoherent rhythm or signal. Then this is just physics. So
I see.
This is physics-based medicine working with your body's electrical system, and with principles that we already understand. The body is, when you look in the mirror and you see you have a poppy seed in your teeth, what's the first thing you do? You take it out, right? So the body, when it hears itself in distortion, it will do the same thing. It's like, wow, I'm dysregulated over there. I got a poppy seed in my teeth over there. And the body will use that reflection to self-correct.
Calibrate.
Yeah. So the tuning forks are used like a mirror. This is what's going on with you, body. They're like a metronome in that they're providing that steady rhythm for the body to gauge itself against. But they also act like a magnet, and then I'm able to actually move around. So a vibrating tuning fork produces a weak electromagnetic charge that makes it like a magnetic stylus. Now, magnetic currents magnetic fields, like the one around our body, guide and inform electric currents. So if you have pain in the shoulder, you have too much current in there. You have inflammation, heat, too much electricity buildup. We're also going to find a jam up in the magnetic field. And by using the vibrating tuning fork like a magnetic stylus, I adjust the magnetic field, which then causes the electricity in the body to move as well. So it's really a process of bringing everything to the midline, just coming to the midline. And then we experience balance, and then the pain in the shoulder goes away. So it's all based on principles that we already understand about physics and about the human body. So it's not really that far-fetched. It's just a very kind of simple, elegant, easy way to help the body to fix itself. So the tuning forks that I have are based in the Schumann resonance, the Earth's electrical pulse, background pulse, and in the Fibonacci sequence. I have a set that's based in sacred geometry and helps to support the underlying geometric template of our etheric blueprint. And then I have 3 forks that are based in the solfeggio series, which is, it's just a different form of scaling that I find to be very beautiful and useful. So those are the forks. They're all extremely high quality forks, some of the best ones you can buy. There's a big difference in tuning forks out there. Like if you're thinking that you want to try a tuning fork, don't buy a $12 one off of Amazon because it will be useless. You'll think sound healing is worthless and it will never get used. Whereas if you buy a really high quality one from me or somebody else who makes these high quality made in America ones, that's a sound healing tool. Like carpenters don't buy their tools at the dollar store, you know, like there's a difference between high quality, you know, instruments and poor quality ones. And so the ones that we make are, you know, I'm a perfectionist and stuff like this, very exacting in my specifications for performance of these tools. And they're not that hard to use. You know, sometimes people get them and they're like, well, I don't know how to use them. Well, the way that you use them is to use them. You know what I mean? Like when I got my first set in 1996, I didn't know. You know, there were no instructions. There was no precedent. I just picked them up and I started to play with them. And then it's okay to sandbox with these tools. But that said, I do explain like the biofield tuning method in my book. And we do have training. We have an online certificate course that people can learn the method and become a practitioner as well as some easier home study stuff to just work on friends and family too.
Oh, that's powerful. It's so interesting. I was, and I'll kind of close off of this one. I was speaking to Dr. Kellerman, and we were having this discussion around like work that he's done, his philosophy actually on psychedelics and the modern a science that he stems or he claims or he calls the quantum science of the Mayans, based upon this idea of their calendar systems and their wave systems. It gives this model of the world where the creation occurs during these waves that kind of enter in throughout those periods. And the calendars are actually more of measurement scales around those specific cycles. So at each point, so when we had the 2012 supposed end of the Mayan calendar was basically just meaning we entered the 9 waves. So the 9th wave joined the rest of the resonance and basically completed the cycle of frequency. And his entire philosophy is that part of, and he gives a lot of historical evidence in relationship to these ideas and these patterns, but he speaks about that the mind downloads or processes this information as a form of geometry, as if there's a geometrical structure of mind that creates how we think, how we interpretate or experience, and what becomes prioritized. And he says this is one of the reasons why when somebody does psychedelic medicines, they see these sacred geometries, these structures, because we're breaking through the, so we say the geometry that we're getting locked in, or the geometrical patterns we get locked in as an ego, and then freeing ourselves from that by opening, and that healing is really what then basically breaks that old mold or allows us to open new power. A very interesting kind of philosophy under this idea of geometry. Now, we obviously don't have the time to go into a deep discussion of geometry and sound and stuff like that. And you have a really excellent video on your channel that I personally stalked. And it was a great hour just to get that kind of points. But I just want to get, like, as we kind of close this, somebody that's getting started, they're on the site, they're picking these tuning forks, and they're like, oh, do I need geometry? Do I need Fibonacci? Do I need this? Firstly, I'd just like you to get your view on the geometry utilization and how useful that is for this, and what would be the best kind of starting point. Because I remember you had a package available on the site that included this book and a set. I don't know if that's still available. If you can just give a little bit of advice on that as we close off today.
Sure. Well, we do have a bare necessities kit, which is the 174, which is kind of like my go-to unweighted fork for field combing, and the sonic slider, which is a weighted fork that's just very useful. So, if somebody wants to get started, it's like one weighted, one unweighted fork to use. So, but that is separate from this sort of geometry concept. To just speak to the geometry, that is a whole big topic. And I did create that hour-long kind of introduction. And the reason why I did that was because it was such an important part of my own education, was to learn about sacred geometry, to learn how to draw it with a compass and a straight edge and a pencil, and to have my mind, my soul be informed by those patterns. There is something about our souls, our minds, that is very geometric. And when we avail ourselves in an immersive way to these shapes, to these forms, that it awakens that in us, and it gives us an interior structure that is very useful. If you've ever been in any of these old world Gothic cathedrals that have all kinds of sacred geometry in them, soaring spaces of beauty and balance, you feel your own soul expand into those places and become elevated, expanded, touched by the vibration of those spaces. So as within, so without, these buildings were meant to represent the human body, the human spirit. So the deeper I go into my studies of sacred geometry, participating in the creation of it, or availing myself to images of it, I feel that awakened structure within myself. And that leads to a kind of a really important framework, because otherwise we're kind of like a bag of water, right? If you just look at our biological aspect, what is it that keeps us upright, that keeps us in structure? It is all of this underlying geometry. Certainly music, and great music, is all math and geometry. And even sound, sound waves tend to be portrayed. We see them, we're told that they're longitudinal waves, but then they're always depicted as transverse waves. And they're depicted as transverse waves kind of going up and down in two dimensions. But sound actually propagates, really all things, but sound propagates spherically from its source. It travels spirally, and it contains complex geometric information. So there's a lot more going on with sound than the oversimplified version that we've been told. And that in the geometry of sound and the geometry of space is a place where we can rest in order, And I think that's so important when you are dysregulated, when you are unorganized, when you are incoherent. Availing yourself to this sort of fundamental geometry of creation in your own human body is surprisingly therapeutic and useful.
Powerful stuff. Again, it's even the Masons recognized back in the old days even the value of this, and the stonemasons and the creation of the cathedrals and all of the architecture behind that and its effect upon the soul, the psyche, the individual for their spiritual liberation. Eileen, this has been exciting. I could have you on here anytime again just to talk more about where we're kind of starting in this conversation. For anybody that's listening, all the links to Eileen's work and store and everything is online. Get your orders. I know I've got mine. I'm getting mine in. Eileen, thanks so much for the time today. I appreciate having you on the show, and I look forward to seeing you again.
That sounds great. Thank you, Adam. Take care, everybody.
Felt a little different, a little uneasy between regular folk, a bit of a dreamer, a lost cause, a little non-ordinary, some would say. I think I've always just been this way. My mother said I was special. My father thought I should be feared. But I knew that witchcraft coursed through my veins the first time I tasted the lips of the goddess inside the rain. Yes, I'm a witch, it's true. And sure, we are the ones who believe in the beauty of nature, who believe in the things science absent of art cannot explain. who instead of religion would have romance. And sure, you may think we have lost our way, when in the world of predictable things we have such unfamiliar things that we would like to say. But maybe in a world so cold and alone, a little unfamiliar is exactly what is needed to show us the way home.